The next major aspect I want to work on is to create custom scenes in code. And this is another really important aspect. Let's talk about why. So far, we always created scenes inside of the editor. For example, we made the gate, we made the player, we made lots of things like that. But sometimes this isn't possible or desirable in the game. For example, when we are working with the lasers, something we are going to do for this part, we cannot just create a scene and then add it because we have to do all of that dynamically. Meaning we want to create a laser whenever the player is shooting. And for that, we have to use code to create and instance a scene. Let's talk about how this is going to work. Number one, we have to create a scene in the first place. This we are still going to do manually, which means we are going to put together a couple of nodes that are going to constitute the laser, and that's going to be one scene. This part we have already done multiple times. It shouldn't be too difficult at this point. Number two, this is something we haven't done yet. We have to create an instance of the scene. The way you have to think about it is that when we are creating a scene, we are basically creating a blueprint, which by itself doesn't do anything. And once we are creating an instance, this is a really important word, then we are creating an actual node that we could use in another scene. And once we have this instance, we need to go through one more step. And that is, we have to add this new instance of the node to the node tree. This is important because at step number 2, when we have an instance, we only basically have a node that we can work with, but it's not attached to our current scene. And for that, we need step number 3, where we add it to the node tree. Only then can we actually see and use it inside of the game. So with that, we have quite a bit of material to go through. Let's jump into Godot and let's have a look. Back in the editor, I want to first of all close the gate because we don't need this part anymore. Next up, I want to create a new scene. And now I have to figure out how to create a basic scene for the laser. And the most important part for now is we have to think about what the root node is going to be. And let's talk about how we have to approach this. We have area 2D, static body 2D, rigid body 2D, and character body 2D. Now, when we are creating the laser, we want to move the laser, obviously, so we have to choose one of these that can collide with something and that can move. The one I'm going to go with is the area 2D. This is a node we can move perfectly fine, and it can also detect collisions, which is basically all we need. Alternatively, you could also use a rigid body 2D or even a character body 2D, although you probably wouldn't want to. A character body 2D would probably be overkill because a laser ultimately is quite simple. And a rigid body 2D also isn't really that necessary because a laser is moving at a constant speed. We don't really need any kind of advanced physics in there. Although later on, when we are working with the grenade, we are going to work with a rigid body 2D. For now though, we don't need it. The way you want to think about it is that you always want to use the simplest node that you can possibly use. In this case, this would be area 2D. I want to create another node, which is going to be an area 2D. This area 2D, I want to rename to laser right away. And now we have to do the usual. We want to add a sprite, and I want to add a collision shape 2D. For the sprite, we will need a texture, which we get inside of graphics, and in there we have projectiles. The file we need for this one is called blue. I just have to drag it in there, and then we are getting the image of a laser. Next up, we have to add the collision shape. For that, I am going to go with something we haven't used yet, which is a capsule. This I want to extend a bit, and basically what this one is a rectangle with rounded corners. Once again, as well, I want to keep the center of this collision shape around the origin point, so position 0 and 0. So I'm going to move the image to align with the collision shape. I think that's looking mostly okay. You can play around with this a lot, and if you want to have a really well-working game, these small details are really what make a good game. So I think this one is a pretty good start. This seems reasonably okay. Which means I can save the entire scene. under scenes, and in there I want to create a new folder. Let's call it projectiles. And I can save it in there. And now we have a laser. This would cover the first part. So now we have created a scene. Next up, we have to create an instance of this scene in the new scene where we want to work with this. What that means is I want to use this laser inside of the level. Specifically, I want to create an instance of the laser when we are triggering the onPlayer laser event. For that, we have to go through two steps. First of all, we have to preload the scene we have just created. And this happens all the way at the top. I want to create a new variable. Let's call it var laser scene. And to preload a scene, we need the function preload. And this preload wants to have a scene. Since we do have quite a lot of stuff in there, you usually just want to type the name of the scene, and then Godot is quite intelligent about it and gives you the scene. Make sure that the ending is TSCN. This is a scene. If you have PNG or anything other than TSCN in there, something probably went wrong. You can be even more aggressive about it and force a certain data type. The data type we're looking for here is called a packed scene. So now we have a scene ready that we can use. What we have to work on next is we have to create an instance of the scene. This is turning the actual scene into a node that we can use in our current scene. That is actually quite easily done, and I want to do all of that inside of onPlayer laser. All I want to do in here is create a new variable that I'm going to call laser. And this laser is going to be an instance, which means I want to get the laser scene, the one we created up here, and then run the method instantiate on it. With that, we have an instance of the scene, which is covering part 2 of our requirement. All that is left to do is to add this scene to the node tree. This we can do with a simple function. It is called addChild. And the child we want to add in this case is going to be the laser. With that, we should be good to go. Let me run the game and let's just see what happens. If I now click on the button, you can see we have the laser. The reason it is up there is because, well, inside of the laser, we always are in the top left point and we don't update this position. Because of that, we always have the laser in this point and it's not moving. So we do have to make some updates, but it's certainly a good start. On top of that, what is another really powerful part of Godot? If I go back to the standard view, if the game is running like it is right now, so I can still run around perfectly fine, then you can return to the editor just fine. And you can actually look on the left. There is, besides local, where you can see all of the nodes, a remote tab. This is only visible when the game is running. And this shows you in real time what is happening inside of the game. So right now we have root. This is a technical part, but then we have the level. This is this level scene. Inside of there, we have the gate and we have the player. These are the two nodes we have added ourselves. But after that, we have the laser 4 times. And if I go back to the game and I keep on clicking, we add more and more lasers. So we can tell in real time, this is showing you what's going on in your game, which is incredibly helpful to debug your game. Also, when you click on them, you can look at the inspector and get a lot of information about what's going on. All of this updates in real time, which is super useful. Although in my case, I want to close the game because we don't need it right now. For now, there are 2 things I want to work on, and let me add comments. Number 1, the most important thing, is we have to update the laser position. Right now, the laser spawns in the top left, and well, that's a problem. Number 2, we have to move the laser. That part should also be fairly obvious, and I do want to add a number 3, which is a bit smaller. I want to add the laser instance to a node 2D. Right now, we always add the laser to the level scene itself, which tends to get a bit messy because we just have a whole bunch of nodes in there. Instead, what is going to be much cleaner is if we add another node 2D that we could rename as projectiles. I want to add the lasers to this node. That way, the entire scene itself keeps much cleaner. But we're going to work on that in more detail later on. First of all, though, we want to update the laser position. And that, in the most basic sense, is actually really easily done. Because this laser now is also just a class. And we know how to update the position of a class. All we have to do is get the laser and then get the position. This position could, for example, be the player position, which means I can simply drag the player node in there and then get the position of the player. Now if I run the game, I can click and the laser is going to be on the position of my player, which is already a pretty good improvement, but not perfect yet. So instead, what I want to do, and let me illustrate the problem. We are spawning the laser around the center of the player, so this red cross, which isn't realistic. Ideally, we want to spawn the laser somewhere from the position of the top of the gun. And for that, we can actually learn about another node and about some randomness, which are two very important concepts in Godot. So what I want to start with is I want to get a couple of random positions around the top of the gun. Around here, I want to have 3 random points distributed something like this. For that, we are going to need a marker 2D. Although this I want to organize because our player scene starts to get a bit messy. So inside of the player, I'm going to add a node 2D. This one is not going to do very much. It's just going to hold other nodes. I want to call this one the laser start positions. What is actually going to become important is I want to add another node, and this node is called a marker 2D. This marker 2D, if I hover over the center, let me show my mouse actually. If I hover over the center, we have a marker 2D, and this I can move. A marker 2D is literally just a position. You don't use it for anything else. If you look on the right, there really isn't too much. So let me put it roughly in the middle. That looks about right. Then I want to duplicate this node. So with the node selected, I click on Ctrl D, and now we have a marker 2D2, and this I move somewhere here. I can do the same operation again, and now move the final marker somewhere here. With that, I get 3 different points, and those are supposed to be my laser starting positions. Next up, inside of the code. First of all, when the player is clicking on the primary action, I have to randomly, let me add a comment, I want to randomly select a marker 2D for the laser start, which means I want to pick one of these 3 nodes, and that is going to be the actual starting position for the laser. Number 2, this is going to be right inside of emit. I want to emit the position we selected. When we are emitting the signal for the laser, we also want to emit the position. So there are 2 things we can work on. Let's start by randomly selecting one of the markers. For that, first of all, I want to get all of the markers inside of a list. That is going to make our life much easier. I'm going to store all of this in a new variable. Let's call this laser markers. To get the laser markers, first of all, I want to get the laser start positions. This is just going to be a node 2D right now. Although this node 2D has children. And these children we can get with the method getChildren. Once we have that, I can simply print the laser markers, and let's see what we get. If I now run the code and I click, we are getting a list inside of the output with 3 markers. We have marker 2D, another marker 2D, and a final marker 2D. This I also want to store in a variable. Let's call it var selected laser. And this should be a lowercase. To get a random item from a list, we first of all need the list itself, so laser markers. And I should say this is an array, not a list, but the difference is fairly minor. On that, we want to use indexing. For example, we could use index 0, this would give us the first item, or index 1, this would give us the second item. but we want to have a random item. For that, we will need random numbers in Godot, which always is a tiny bit weird. Basically, what you have to do is use the function randi. Then we need the modulus operator, so the percentage sign that looks like this. And then we need the highest number, which in our case is going to be the laser markers dot, and this would be the size. And just to test if this is working, let me print the selected laser. If I now run the game again, I can click and I always get some kind of marker. There is some randomness, although since we don't have too many nodes, it's going to be a bit hard to see. But there you can definitely tell we get random markers. There are other ways to create randomness, but this is one of the more common ones you are going to see. You want the function randi, then the percentage sign, and then the highest number that you want for your randomness. In our case, the number here would be a 3, because there are 3 items inside of the list. And this would give us a number that goes from 0 up to 3, but not including 3. The possible numbers we could get would be 0, 1, and 2. And those we are then using for indexing on the laser markers. With that, I can get rid of the print statement and of the comment as well. Next up, I want to emit the position that we are getting from this selected laser position. And something like this we have already done. So I want to go all the way to the top. There we have the laser signal. This signal should contain one argument, which is going to be the position. Now that we have that, when I'm emitting the laser, I want to also, as an argument, include selected laser and then the position of this one node. That is actually all we needed. Now we are emitting a position. And this position we can capture inside of the level, because now onPlayerLaser is going to contain one argument, which we can capture in a parameter, which is going to be the position. And this position we now want to use to set as the laser position. Let's try all of this now. If I click, nothing is happening. However, if I go back to Godot and go back to the normal view and remote, you can see we have the lasers. And if I keep on clicking, we also can see we are generating more lasers. So the tooltip is a bit annoying right now, but if you look at the scroll bar, we are definitely creating more lasers. So this is working. Basically, the one change we have to make, we don't look at the position of the selected laser. Instead, we want to look at the global position. Now if I run all of this, we can see the laser. And this one is working perfectly fine. Which begs the question, what is a global position and how does that differ from a normal position? Let's talk about it. So far, we always used a local position, and this position is always relative to a parent. We are basically measuring how far off we are from the center of the parent. A global position, however, is an exact pixel coordinate that is independent from any parent. The way you want to think about it is, imagine you are sitting in your house right now. You do have some relative position to the center of the house. This would be your local position. But that being said, you still have, even in your house, a specific GPS location. And this position doesn't care about the position of your house. This would be your global position. To be a bit more specific for Godot, imagine you add a node 2D with an offset of x100 and y200, and you give this node a child on the same position. The child node would have a local position of x being 0 and y also being 0. That is because we didn't move it away from the parent. However, it does have a global position of 100 and 200 because that is the actual pixel position. Understanding local and global positions can be a bit tricky, especially in the beginning. I suppose for now, just generally keep in mind that there can be a difference and just experiment with the two. Eventually, this should become fairly straightforward. With that though, we can return to Godot because now we have the laser. And this is covering the first part. We have to update the laser position, so I can get rid of that. Next up, we have to move the laser. For that, I want to return to the laser, and now the laser is going to need a script. So I click on attach a new script. For the template, I want to go with empty, and for the folder, we are still in projectiles, so I am happy with that. I can click on create, and now we have a script. First of all, I want to define some kind of movement speed. Let's just call it speed. This is going to be an integer, and for the number here, let's go with 1000 for now. Once we have that, we are going to need a process function. All we want to do in there is to update the position of the laser. So I want to change the position, and all I want to do is I want to have some kind of direction. And this direction I want to multiply with the speed. And once again, don't forget, we also want to multiply all of that with delta. Now, the direction doesn't exist right now. And later on, we want to have the direction the player is looking at. For now, though, I want to have a var direction, which is going to be a vector2. And the actual variable is simply going to be vector2.up. At the moment, the player is always looking up. So this is the only vector we need. I can now run all of this and shoot the laser, and we get a laser that is moving. This is looking really good. At this point, you probably want to experiment with the speed of the laser. And there's one really nice feature of Godot. When you are creating a variable at the beginning of the script, what you can do is add the keyword export. And this should be combined. It should be orange, then you know it's working. What this one is doing, if I return to the 2D view and with the laser selected, I now get another parameter inside of the inspector. And this is giving me the speed, and I can update this. So let's say to 2000. And now if I run the game again, the lasers are moving a lot faster. All this export does is it exposes the variable to the inspector, so you can change it much more easily, which very often is really nice and makes the game much easier to update. Cool. In our case, this is covering another important part. We can now move the laser. Finally, I want to add an instance to the laser to this projectiles instead of the level node. And this is super easily done. Right now, when we are calling this a child, we are calling the function on the node the script was attached to, which is this node 2D right now. I already have it selected. To add the child to another node, all you have to do is get the node itself. So let me drag in the projectiles and then run the method add child. Don't forget to actually add the child, which is going to be the laser, and then we are good to go. If I now run all of this again, click on remote, you can now see, if I move the game to the side, inside of projectiles, we have a drop down, and we keep on adding more lasers. There's a bit of a delay, but it definitely works. Cool. With that, we have covered the final part. All we have to do now is do an exercise, and then we are good to go. When this secondary action is triggered, I want you guys to create a grenade scene with a rigid body 2D. For now, the movement is going to be really weird, so don't worry too much about it. I'll cover that in the next part. Once you have that, create an instance of this node in the level scene and position it at the gun nozzle position. Basically, I want you guys to repeat what we did for the laser, except with the rigid body 2D. The major difference now is that instead of a laser, we have a grenade. You can find the image for that next to the lasers in the graphics folder. Pause the video now and try to implement all of that. Back in Godot, I want to create a new scene, and this new scene is going to be a rigid body 2D. Let's rename this right away to grenade. Like with the laser, we're going to need two more nodes. We first of all need a sprite so we can see something, and then we need a collision shape 2D. The sprite we're getting from projectiles, and there we have grenade. Let me place it in there, and there we go. We have a grenade. For the collision shape, I think for this one, a circle shape is going to be ideal. Something like this. With that, I can save all of this as grenade next to the laser. Before we are using this, I want to, inside of the level, just attach this scene with Ctrl-Shift and A and add the grenade. Because I think by default, this one is a bit large. It's even larger than the player. For that, inside of the grenade, I want to get the sprite 2D and transform the scaling to, let's say, 0.2. Also now, I have to update the collision shape to something like this. Save the scene, and now we have a grenade that's probably a bit too small. Let's go for a scale of 0.4. Once again, we need a new collision shape. That's looking good. And now this feels much more appropriate. Now that we have that, we can work inside of the level script to create an instance of this scene once the player clicks on the secondary action, which triggers on player grenade. I guess as a reminder, when the player is clicking on secondary action, then we are emitting the grenade signal. And this grenade signal we are capturing inside of this function. First of all though, we have to create a laser scene, like we have done for the laser earlier. To keep things consistent, I want to get a grenade scene, which once again is going to be a packed scene, which I want to preload, and in there I want to get the grenade. Spelling this correctly would help a lot. For this one now, we have a couple of options. We have grenade.png, then inside of the UI, we have another grenade.png, and then we have the actual scene. So be careful which one you are choosing here. Once again, you always want to have a TSCN ending. I guess Godot is quite smart here. If you choose anything else, like the image, you are going to get an error. Like so, that you cannot assign a value of a compressed texture 2D to a variable grenade scene. That is because we have a specified type packed scene. So this packed scene is actually quite helpful here. So let me undo all of this. This is going to work much better. Next up, we have to create an instance of this packed scene, which I do by creating a new variable. Let's call it grenade. And for that, we want to have the grenade scene and then instantiate. Next up, I want to get the grenade and then update the position and set the position we are hopefully getting from the signal. Right now, it doesn't exist, so Godot is giving us an error. To fix that, inside of the player, this grenade emit has to include a position. I suppose for this one, we could go with a random position, and if you want to practice that, I would very much recommend you to do so. Although to simplify things a bit, I want to get a position, let's call it the marker. An alternative way of approaching all of this is, once again, I could get the laser start positions. On that, I want to get the children once again. And on that, I simply want to pick child number 0. This is the one I placed in the center. So this one should always work just fine. Since this is now going to return a node, I can get the global position on this one right away. Let's actually remove the marker because now we are simply getting a position. And this position I want to emit when we are sending the signal. So with that, back inside of the level, I get another parameter, which is the position. And with that, Godot should be happy again. Perfect. Finally, we have to add this new grenade to the node tree. And for that, I am going to reuse the projectiles node 2D. So I want to get projectiles and then add a child, except now the child is going to be the grenade. And with that, I can run all of this. If I now click with my right mouse button, we get some weird behavior. We do get a grenade, but well, it's falling down. And that's a very weird behavior. The lasers, though, still work just fine. And this part is getting really long, so let's finish it here. And in the next part, we talk more about rigid body 2Ds. If you understand them, they're quite easy to work with, but if you don't, they are really frustrating.